you heard of a ship called the Good Reuben James?
Hello everybody. Today we'll be talking about the USS Reuben James, otherwise known as the first US Navy destroyer that was sunk during World War II. Actually, before World War II, but we'll get into that in a second. Before fully jumping into the Navy ship that sunk on Halloween, if you're new here, welcome, and if you're returning, it's good to see you again.
Aye.
On December 7th, 1941, the United States would endure a surprise attack from the Empire of Japan when it attacked Pearl Harbor. This is largely considered the beginning of World War II for America, as they would soon declare themselves at war. However, a lesser-known attack would signify the start of the deadliest war for other Americans. In the early hours on October 31st, 1941, U.S. Navy ship, the USS Reuben James, would be struck by a torpedo. This was before the US declared themselves at war in the Second World War. Before the US was fully into the war, it was sending Navy ships to escort other Allied merchant ships. This included ships from Great Britain. These merchant ships usually just had war materials rather than being actual warships, which is why the US didn't encounter too many attacks when they were escorting these merchant ships. Now, I say too many attacks, because as you'll see, besides the USS Reuben James, other destroyers were attacked, but none of them sunk before the Reuben James. However, just like the USS Reuben James, were mostly swept under the rug. The government didn't want to acknowledge that their ships were getting sunk before they were engaged in conflict, which makes the events that would occur on October 31st, 1941, somewhat predictable. So why was the USS Reuben James in a position where it could get sunk? Well, during this time of supposed neutrality for the United States, Germany and Great Britain were going at it, and the United States Navy was helping Great Britain. The United States Navy was helping to supply American troops stationed in Iceland, and whatever, quote, hitchhikers came along the way would gain protection by the United States. Hitchhiker is an extremely loose term to use here, because usually hitchhiker means you don't plan on picking someone up. But I digress. Old Rube, as the sailors used to call it, on the USS Reuben James, was a four-stack destroyer, commissioned in 1920, 314 feet long, 30 feet in the beam, and capable of speeds up to 33 knots. That's close to 38 miles per hour, or 61 kilometers for you British folk over across the pond, as some say. Old Rube was armed with 4-inch guns in the main battery, torpedo tubes, depth charges, that's going to be important later, and numerous anti-aircraft weapons, and it was constructed after the First World War. The real Reuben James distinguished himself fighting in the First Barbary War, supposedly jumped in front of his lieutenant to shield him from a blast wound from invading pirates.
Service! Get down, Mr. President! No!
When the USS Reuben James took off on its final voyage, it was escorting Great Britain's convoy, HX-156, on the Atlantic. The England convoy was originally escorted by the Royal Canadian Navy, and then was passed off to the United States. Imagine if your girlfriend says she's going to a college party, but it's just at a frat dude's house. She's getting passed around.
What you say, he's just a friend.
Around 600 miles away from Ireland, the USS Reuben James would be attacked and destroyed by a German submarine, U-552. The torpedo would hit the port side of the US destroyer, igniting the forward magazine and splitting the ship in half. This is coming from survivors of the USS Reuben James, which is how I'm going to try to describe the events of the actual incident. The survivors have stated, quote, "The whole front of the ship lifted up and it was gone. Gone in an instant." Most of these survivors, if not all, were the ones who managed to jump into the freezing cold water away from the Reuben James. Because while the USS Reuben James did have lifeboats on it, it was only 2. So that's not great. And that's proven because one of them was destroyed and then the other one was disabled and wouldn't go down into the water. So it was totally unusable. After the torpedo hit, I bet most of the men in the frigid cold water already had thought that the worst had come. Maybe another German attack at most. Yet what the sailors soon heard would prove that they had a lot more to go through. Unsecured depth charges that fell off of the USS Reuben James started to arm themselves. Those depth charges would soon go off. Fireman 2nd Class George Gear has said if it hadn't been for those depth charges, we probably would have had another 40 or 50 survivors. Some people were knocked unconscious, others were torn apart. This is what a real-life depth charge looks like. Not a nuclear depth charge. I think that's pretty obvious, but I can just see a comment now. The escort that the USS Reuben James was with had multiple other United States Navy destroyers out assisting the USS Reuben James. So rescuers were not far off. And from those rescuers we get more illustrations of the brutality of the attack. Choking on oil and water, they are like small animals caught in molasses. Rescuers swiftly grabbed the survivors, of which there were only 45, and 115 sailors would lose their lives. That includes all of the ship's officers. I couldn't think of a better place to put this tidbit of information, but I mentioned earlier that this escort had a couple of US destroyers on it. Only one of them had radar, making it very easy for a submarine to just sneak past and shoot a torpedo. The sinking of the ship, the freezing cold weather, as well as the depth charges going off, must have been horrific. But it could have been worse. The reason I say that is other attacks have proven so. On April 2nd, 1942, the same German submarine, U-552, sank the SS David H. Atwater, an unescorted collier, off of the coast of Virginia. Unescorted is the key word there, because no one would stop the German submarine from coming over to the stragglers and then gunning them down with the machine guns on deck. And the reason I bring that specific example up, that's all to say that the USS Reuben James, although faced catastrophic losses, could have lost everyone. But you want to know something kind of weird? The United States were fully aware of attacks that were occurring before they declared themselves at war against Japan. In fact, the knowledge that the United States was under attack before World War II officially started for the United States was almost common knowledge. I've been telling this story in a certain way for narrative reasons, but now it's time to unpeel the banana. Sailors on the USS Reuben actually were extremely fearful of an attack, because they had heard of numerous other attacks that would occur to escort destroyers. Most of the attacks would just happen against merchant ships, but if a destroyer was in the way, then it's in the way. Weeks prior to the USS Reuben James, on October 17, 1941, the USS Kearney would be attacked via torpedo by a U-boat. But Bear, why are you not talking about that then? Well, because it's my fucking channel. Sorry, the USS Kearney stayed afloat, albeit with the loss of 11 sailors and double the injuries. But that attack, as well as similar ones like it, caused mass paranoia on the USS Reuben James. I think it's encapsulated with Chief Machinist's mate, Alton Cousins, who visited his family that fall, and there he left his watch behind, saying, "It's not going down with me," to his wife. But I think one of the big reasons why the USS Reuben James has so much notoriety, other than it being the first US ship that was sunk, is that it represents and brings into question how many people, or rather soldiers, lost their lives without explanation simply because their bosses didn't want the public to know that America was at war. And I'm not talking secret agencies or departments in combat, because many of the sailors on the USS Reuben James and other ships that were attacked before Pearl Harbor were just normal sailors. Not some top secret team that couldn't have a family or even a cat. They had families and loved ones who cared about them. And when news reached the homeland of the sinking of the USS Reuben James, families were terrified and confused, because the information that was given was that the ship sunk. Not many other details were released. Many family members, especially wives, were wondering what happened to their loved ones, and this would continue for days on end. For example, on November 2nd, Imelda Edwards, wife of Lieutenant Commander Edwards, wrote to her husband, quote, "It has been 2 days, and still no one has told me that you are coming back to me. I know you will, though." Before she could mail the letter out, she was told that her husband was not going to come back, as he was one of the sailors who lost his life. Most newly widows received the news via telegram. Many people were looking to place blame on someone. Some pointed blame at FDR. That's Franklin Roosevelt for you non-abbreviation ducks out there, as FDR was the one who ordered convoy duty before World War II technically started for the United States. Others pointed blame at Germany, the ones who torpedoed the USS Reuben James. But also, if Germany is fighting Great Britain, I think it's understandable to think that Germany is going to attack Great Britain in all ways, shapes, and forms. So maybe don't go protecting Great Britain if we're not declaring ourselves at war and don't want to be a part of this type thing. And please don't get me wrong, Germany in World War II was the bad guys. They lost, and that's good because they were bad. Very, very bad. That being said, FDR didn't break off diplomatic relationships with Germany after this happened. He would later when, we went to war against them. But it was almost as if those lives lost on the USS Reuben James didn't matter. Enough to break off diplomatic relationships, at least. Now, that's not to say that the sinking of the USS Reuben James didn't ignite many men in America to go fight. Like John Ryan, who was 43, joined the Navy after his son, John Jr., died on the Reuben James. He said he was, quote, itching to get a crack at the German Navy. Now, looking at reactions in a broader sense to this sinking, Prime Minister Winston Churchill, that's Great Britain's head honcho for World War II times, gave some sympathetic words to FDR, which is so nice. And First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt wrote she couldn't help but think of every one of the 120 men and their families, who are anxiously awaiting news. Now, on a bit of a brighter and funnier note, Russian news was ecstatic hearing about this because they thought Germany poked the bear, so now the bear is gonna go freaking hog wild on Germany. Now, I don't know if you know this or not, but Germany and Russia during World War II had this little cute thing called hatred. Pure f***ing hatred for each other. So again, Russia was all for the United States going against Germany. The enemy of my enemy type thing. But communism. However, that wouldn't happen until 5 weeks later. Well, 5 weeks until America declared war against Japan, and then I think we declared war against Germany in like December 12th or something. I can look this up. I have a computer right here. When did America declare War II? December 11th. Look how history teachers, all of my history teachers out there. If you're watching this for some reason, why? But two, I have some knowledge. I still didn't get the date right because it was December 11th is when America and Germany started boxing each other and using common men while the presidents and rich people just sat at home. I'm ranting again. The U.S. Navy held a memorial with the widows and other family members gathered, as well as some press, but barely any. And while the sailors' families could never look past the loss of their loved ones, America in general did. Because, like I said earlier, 5 weeks from the sinking of the USS Reuben James, Pearl Harbor was attacked, resulting in America finally declaring themselves at war. However, one person that didn't forget may be the reason you know about the USS Reuben James. Folk singer Woody Guthrie wrote an infamous song, The Sinking of the Reuben James.
Tell me what was their names, tell me what was their names. You have a friend on that good Reuben James.
While turmoil within the world was at an all-time high, I mean, we had like 2 wars kind of named after the planet, it is a shame that diplomacy and public opinion led to the dismissal of so many loss of lives. And real quick, I understand that happens a lot throughout history, but that doesn't mean it doesn't suck every single time. Because I knew America got involved in World War II when Japan attacked us at Pearl Harbor, and then we started fighting Germany. I didn't know that Germany was already fighting us. But that's where I'll leave it with you. Did you know about the sinking of the USS Reuben James? Let me know your thoughts. If you enjoyed this video, a like and a share really helps me out. It gets the channel more exposure. If you think I earned a subscription, then, click that button, and I'll see you next week, because I do these every single week. Not like talking about history every week, like sometimes I talk about dumb stuff. If you've been watching through October, you know that I've been wearing masks and costumes for, spooky season. I felt that would probably be a bit insensitive, seeing how we're talking about real loss of life instead of like Art the Clown going ham on someone. So, yeah. So that's why you see my pretty face. You better say I'm pretty. Also, I couldn't play too much of the Woody Guthrie song, simply because of copyright reasons. However, it will be linked in the description below. Same with all my sources, just like every single historical video. Alright, see you next week. Bye.
Remember the name of that